Welcome back. We're here with Tim Johnson Aramaki. Very fortunate to have a chief of staff from Kaiser Permanente join us today for another episode of Culture Chat, where we talk all things workplace, people, process, projects, programs, all the P things. And again, thanks so much for joining us, Tim, to have a chat about your role as chief of staff. One of the things that I always think about with that role and having had that role is the amount of heavy influence that is required, because you don't have a team usually, and we don't do the carrot or stick thing anymore. So you really have to work hard to rally folks around. So welcome. Let's chat.
Yeah, and you mentioned influence. I'm glad to be here, and good to see both of you. When you mention influence, and the first thing I think is I put lack of influence, because that tends to be sort of an area of challenge, right? So you're always having to represent your VP, your executive, and I think we were chatting about this a little bit right before we started to hit record. And when you send out those emails, you're always CCing your own boss on it, because that's that little extra oomph. But to go off that, it feels like sometimes it can be a great job, right? Because there's variety in that job. But the challenge is influence is one of the things that you have to lean in on. And also the people on the team, what's that analogy about, like, everyone knows the part of the elephant, but they don't know they're blindfold. They know that it's part of an elephant, but they have no idea they're touching an elephant. They're like, this is this is a hose, and this feels like a leg. And I feel like that's sort of how the people on this team of 200 plus understand me. No one understands me exactly what my role is. So it goes everywhere from really up high and working on things like strategic plans to other people emailing you or pinging you like, where do I find this? Or how does Outlook work?
It totally
really
is the jack of all trades too, right? And that's what makes the job challenging, but also kind of rewarding. But I think you're right. Nobody really knows what the job is, so you're always having to navigate that. The nuances in there and figuring out, is this something I should be doing? What's the need here?
Yeah. I think it's just such a great example of, and we really were talking about this right before we got started, but it really is this role where it's like you have the weight of the world, because, for your department, whatever the initiatives are, whatever the strategic plan executing pieces are, sit in your bucket as responsibility to make happen. But you don't have, I would say, you don't have the official role of these people I get to instruct or support in really driving and delivering this, right? If that sounds right. Support, maybe I'm just trying not to be like boss, but like essentially you're not a boss of anybody to be like, okay, right. Yep, this is what your goal is and this is what you're executing, and now we're going to talk about how you're doing that. You don't really get to do that. Sorry, I was just going to say, but where I do think it is actually very influential is you have such an amazing vision of what everyone is doing, and this ability to be an amazing maestro, right, around making sure we've got things coordinated in the right way. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
No. It brings to mind like project management in general, right? Project management, and it's like you're responsible to keep things moving forward. And as a chief of staff, there's many things that you may be accountable. You might be doing project management on multiple projects, right? And then the next level is like making sure you're connecting the dots between these various projects, right? And I learned from some of the best, including the woman who's in the middle of my screen right now, because she manages to bring those projects in, people in, the resources, and tying them together, and the questions. Sometimes it does make you feel like the persona non grata in a meeting, because you're always, people are moving ahead on something and you're like, something's going on over here. Hold on one second. Maybe we're duplicating efforts.
That's right.
So I think that happens a lot. And as you were talking, Andy, I was just realizing this was just happening last week. And I think sometimes I feel more responsibility for something than I'm supposed to have. Yeah. Because you have that purview, you feel, and I'm going to get really specific. We have at Kaiser Permanente, we have that people pulse thing, right? Which is twice a year, we survey everyone in the organization. Yeah, it's an engagement survey. And I know that I have part of it, but then I start feeling like I had to check myself. I started feeling like I was carrying too much of the weight. Every manager has a responsibility to get their team and to encourage their team to take it. And I, up here, I'm trying to do that, cascade that down too. But I had to step back and say, we got our results, and it wasn't exactly where we wanted to be, but that wasn't because of me. That's everyone together, right?
It truly is a team.
It really truly is, right. And I think that's such a great point, because at organizations I've worked for, I think anyone who does any kind of employee engagement stuff, there's always sort of this governing body that's like, we want these to be the scores, or, we need this point improvement. Yeah. And so then it's like, then you go back to those same leaders and you're like, fix this thing. And I'm like you, persona non grata. Well, no one shows up to work to be a failure, right? If the managers knew how to fix this stuff, likely they would. Don't just take a spreadsheet that has some action items on it. Like, you actually have to work with people to figure out what is actually gonna move the needle on some of this stuff. So I think, to your point, it is a team effort in a lot of ways, but certainly can never fall on, especially when most of the issues come with management and poor engagement scores. It certainly can't be someone who's not managing anybody.
Right. This is sort of understanding the limitations of your influence. Like, you have to go, where are the opportunities to grow your influence? That's and right. Then other parts, like, if you hit the brick wall, don't take it personally. And you're right, it's about managers oftentimes. Why does someone leave a job? Their manager. But also, we've been dealing with things like, I don't know, a global pandemic, that's really flipped things topsy-turvy. So say, oh, well, we want to move up on this. I don't know if we've still reckoned with everything, whether people are remote, hybrid. What does hybrid mean? Are we calling people back into work? We had to shift people into being comfortable working remote, and now that they're coming back in, we have to re-socialize them. Yeah, I'm talking about even myself. Oh my God, I saw 3 people today in person. That's a little too much.
But, I'm exhausted.
Yeah, exactly. It's nap time.
It's true. I mean, it's true, right? Some people are super energized by that. Many of us aren't. But this piece on people pulse. And these engagement surveys are a point in time. So I appreciate what you both are bringing up. We can't just take the spreadsheet and the results and go, okay, fix that. There's so much more listening that needs to happen, and finding out, okay, what does this look like when we do this well? Right? What does it look like when we've raised the number on it? How are we going to feel different? And that takes work. A lot of times it does fall to the chief of staff to do that. I think for many of us, it's because that's part of our passion too. Was one of my favorite things about having the job. And now it's one of the things we love to do with clients, to go in there and just say hey, let's drill down and listen to some of these things and come up with an actual meaningful action plan that people have shared is going to move the needle, right? And what's possible, because not all managers are created equal, right? We all have different gaps and skills and even just values on what we prioritize. So we have to dig a little bit deeper in that. And, it kind of drives me crazy that we do these these surveys and then go, okay, move the number.
Well, and you're mentioning listening more, and listening, and the knowledge that comes from that listening is part of growing your influence too, right? So you mentioned that, and we sort of hit a little bit of a wall with these engagement scores and trying to interpret them, because they tend to be broad, right? They don't give you action steps. You look at one of the scores and you're like, there's about 150 things we could do, but that's like throwing spaghetti in the wall and see what sticks, right? Yeah. So we actually went ahead and did a listening tour. We invited each and every person on the team to these small, moderated sessions where we drilled down on 4 specific areas that we thought, well, we want to know more about it.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say you want career development? Because that could mean, that's just a screen for I want a promotion.
Right.
But also, what are the other dimensions of career development? What do people want? Because, we don't have unlimited resources. We don't have unlimited time. We want to actually support the teams in the way that they want to be supported. And some of these engagement surveys, you just need more information. So that's actually been great for influence.
Yeah, and I love that. I'm just going to reiterate, probably the single biggest mistake people make is they take the results, and then God bless these organizations who are doing these employment surveys. They're like, recommendations when you have these things. And so then it's like, let me copy and paste and put that inside my Excel sheet. And now there's what I'm going to work on. And it's like, these are
in healthcare departments or healthcare organizations of your size, these are the 5 things you should do.
Right.
Okay.
And I'm like, hey, guess what? And I actually did this with a health system in New York. If you actually go in and just talk to people, they'll tell you exactly what they want you to do. They'll tell you exactly what they need. You don't even have to guess. And then guess what? You can also use those same people to make that transition, to make that change. And now guess what? They now own that. So they're not going to poo-poo something that was their idea, that they have implemented and that they own. So by simply taking this extra step and saying, we're going to just go in and ask more questions. Rachel and I like to talk about the curious state. Just go in and be curious and push it back on them. And I don't mean in a, make it their responsibility, be supportive of it. Yeah. You want to push it back on them to say, what is it that we need to fix? This is what we heard from you guys. Tell us exactly what we can start working on.
And people do want ownership. These, like you said, are your change agents. Then they're going out there doing the thing and making it happen. And that is the influence, right? It might feel, I don't know what it might feel like, but that is the influence. Going out there to listen and saying, okay, so this is what you want, this is how we do it. Or even being able to say having a conversation, because now we are in more of a conversation than you take in a survey. It's here's some things, or here's some challenges, right? Here's some reasons why, and then we can start to unpack that together and come up with solutions. But I think that is the influence, and even to what you said before, Tim, about listening is part of the influence. It's because now you know what's important to them. Now you know what they value. Now you know what they care about, so you can leverage that information to then be able to influence down the line. It's all about connecting those dots and those pieces. I need you to do this project. This is why it's important. Because remember over here, you said that this was important to you. Look at that. Here you go.
That's right.
And unfortunately, I think there are leaders out there who are afraid to open what they consider to be Pandora's box. That everything's been under lockdown, right? They're okay with this engagement survey because, well, it's just what's been done. It's gonna come out every year, or and they know how to excuse themselves from the ups and downs of the survey. So we had a whole bunch of new staff, or we lost staff, or the pandemic, or it's very
project was influencing that.
You can explain it away. You can explain it away, right? That's what we all do. We explain like the graph, right? But when you listen, it's not as easy. You can't just explain away. You actually have to do. But sort of convincing people that this is what they should do. Right. Is an interesting, because I think as consultants you come in and you go, of course, this is what we need. We need to hear from the people. As managers, if they've never done something like this,
it's terrifying.
They don't know what to expect. And then, I had to help, okay, here are the parameters we're going to put around it, right? We're going to explain to people, there are things that, you may have a lot of feedback. We're going to take all your feedback. But some things will be, under our control. Some things will be under our influence. And some things, that the sun rises is not anything that we control.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, but
and just bring them in.
Yeah,
it's
bring
so
them in.
perfect though, because you can actually explain those things away, right? Like, hey, we can't change Medicare. Changing Medicare is not
Right.
within the scope of what we can do here today. So it's not that we don't hear you. We understand, and we understand that frustration, but totally out of our control. So you actually have that conversation with people.
Right.
It disarms, because it's not like you're over here sitting
Bingo.
just not doing the thing that they don't want you to do. So I do agree with you. I think a lot of leaders would prefer, like, let's just be quiet. Let's not stir up a hornet's nest. But your hornet's nest is there. And either you can be in control of how you get rid of that hornet's nest, or all of a sudden it drops and now explodes all over the place. But you don't get to get rid of the hornet's nest just by ignoring it. It's not going away.
Right. No, and just having people talk, just speak what they're thinking, is, I think you said disarming. I was diffuses. Some things it doesn't diffuse. Some things, those are real issues and they need to be dealt with. But there's other things. There's just a value of having someone speak something and knowing that they've been heard. I just saw it time and time again. We must have done 10 different sessions, and every time at the end asking them, like, is there anything else you want to let us know, that we didn't cover? And what came out 100% of the time was, thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this. And thank you for doing this. And you think, my God, why haven't we been doing this all since the beginning of time?
Well, when I rubbed my hands together like this, it was because I was like, well, this means you're not talking to your teams and you're afraid to talk to your teams. And that's why you think it's a Pandora's box. There should be nothing that is not known to
Surprise.
you as a manager. There should be zero surprises, because you should be huddling with your team. You should be doing one-on-ones. There should be nothing that you don't know. Maybe you don't know the solutions, and that therein lies the conversation to have the solutions. But if you're telling me there's a Pandora's box, I'm telling you, you need to double down. You need to definitely meet with small teams, big teams, one-on-one. This is a for sure thing. There should be no surprises in your organization.
It's like if something is causing fear in you, you should actually bring yourself closer to it. Right? Like that's, sure, a fire, stay away from a fire. But, things...
But you want to know there's a fire. You don't want to be asleep while the fire's going.
True. Just bring yourself closer to something that's making you uncomfortable, because there's a reason it's making you uncomfortable, and there's something that needs to be surfaced.
What is fascinating to me, and having done this for a really long time, is when you go in and you sit and talk with people, most of the things they need are so easy. Like, to really make people happy, people are always like, oh, you got to give more money. It's like, no, maybe they just need a better workstation. Maybe they just need to make sure that they can, when they send an email, someone's responding to it. Maybe they need an outlet every day, because they have barriers that are in front. Some of the solutions are so simple. They don't even cost anything. They're so simple. And what you gain from solving these little tiny things, the low-hanging fruit, people like to say, but these little tiny things is so much bigger than if you gave everyone raises across the board, because everyone will get their raise and then they start coming back to their crappy workstation. That gives them a headache, and it doesn't, the chair's broken and whatever. So I always say
it's the same song.
It's this.
Because we haven't actually fixed it.
Because we didn't solve what was really wrong. Yeah.
Right, Andy, you must have read the results of our listening tours, because it was like a desk, an ergonomic chair. We want to actually we want to actually see each other more often. I mean, it was
little stuff.
Little stuff, and what's good is also for the leaders to be able to read this, right?
Yeah.
They may know it, and with everything that they're doing, they may dismiss some of these little things, but as they come up and they see it in the report, they see it, we discuss it, they then have to realize and reckon that these are important things to people.
To them, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. And in all fairness to leaders, like, just because I don't want to be a leader basher,
No.
is they literally because of the structure of a lot of the way organizations are run, is they're in a constant state. Talk about fires. They're in a constant state with their extinguisher, just trying to figure out which direction and which fire to put out. So, but a lot of that is due to, we've got unhappy employees who then aren't engaged in work, that are then not following. It's all connected in the end. So I told you I worked the same hospital system in New York. We went and it found out that this lady was constantly having to leave, calling off of work because she had terrible headaches. Well, she had terrible headaches after rounding. And by the way, we didn't just get to go to have one conversation, because the first time you go, it's, yeah, we're good, everything's fine, we're fine, right? But on this continuous process of like going and checking in, it's like, man, I'm just having headaches. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about your headaches. What do you think is there a cause? Can we look at your ergonomics? It turns out she was sitting too close to the light, and the light was, so it was like, oh my gosh, look at how many absent work days, productivity days were lost that could have easily been fixed just by changing a light, just by moving it. Simple. So it's like back to the whole influencing piece. Having conversations with people helps to build relationships with folks. And once you have positive relationships with folks, that is influence, right? Because more than likely now you can go to said employee and say, hey, would you mind working an extra something? They're going to immediately trigger and remember, this was the guy that came in and listened to what I had to say and got it fixed, supported it, helped it move in the process.
I do feel like that right there has been the key to my success over the last little years. And it is just building relationships with people, listening to them, having a conversation, showing up as myself, like, hey, what's going on? What's the weekend? What's the thing? And just chatting to build that trust, to build that connection. So then when the project does come down the pipeline, you're like, oh, hey, I know you do this thing. Can you do X, Y, Z? And they're like, yeah, totally, friend. And that's how we feel about it, right? Like, somebody else, and you can see it because somebody else goes and asks the same thing, and they're like, I'm too busy. Right. You'll need to take that to my boss, or whatever. That's right. But it just, and I hope that doesn't come off as like manipulative, because people can tell the difference when you genuinely care and are connected to them versus you're always looking for what's in it for you. I think people see through that too.
Well, and this, as you said, that made me think about like being market facing, actually working with our external customers in a former role, right? And a lot of people who are market facing talk about relationship. Yes, I think it's the value you bring to a relationship, right? And also being someone who cares. I guess maybe that's part of the value. But you mentioned like just being friends, like. Is that manipulation? No. Like, if you care, you're just being authentically who you are. Right. And in a customer relationship, when something hits the fan, if you have that caring relationship, you get a few extra credits. You're given a little bit more leeway on things, right? I mean, often also,
we have
if
a
you're bringing
relationship.
you have a relationship.
To leave the relationship.
Right, just to fire you and move on to the next one. So, I think that's also important, very important internally too. It's both the caring relationship and then the work value relationship, a combination of those. And that's how you also increase your influence, right?
Totally. And so when people email you to say, hey, how do I find that thing on HR, blah, 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 you do that stuff because you've done something for them. So now they'll in turn want, you've been helpful to them. Right, but that's the value of the relationship. You've right. provided something to them, and sometimes it's listening and venting and just asking what's going on, whether it's work or personal. And when they need something, they know they can count on you. And which also makes the job really hard, because I know for me that when I did feel like I was everything to everybody, and it took me probably 2 years to really figure out my boundaries around that, and to not take that home and be a little too emotionally invested into what was happening for 200 people. Like that's not really possible. So yes, I want to be helpful to you in the context that works for both of us. I
just had a thought. I was going to go back to something Andy was talking about. You were talking about leader bashing, or not wanting to avoid leader bashing, and I'm totally on board with you on that, because I think you explained it and described it exactly well, which is they have so many things that so many objectives and goals and organizational goals that they're aligned to, that sometimes these smaller things, like someone's not getting their ergonomic chair, is just not making it on their daily radar, right? Mm-hmm. But that's also part of the influence, like what you need to do in this chief of staff role is sometimes slow things down.
That's right.
Bring their attention to something as they're looking at like revenue cycles and, worrying about the budget or what the forecast, right? Like, okay, I'm glad you're taking care of all of that, but also here's what we're hearing from the workforce, right? And figuring out the way to do that. And that as a chief of staff also, it's hard in the beginning, right? Because you're like, this just doesn't seem to be that big of a deal, is it, right? But that's one of your purposes. That's one of the things. And if you do that and you keep bringing things up, that also, the trust is there between the leaders and you, right? And you can also, in some ways, I'm not the steward or representative for all the employees in the team. That's not my job if we use a labor union sort of structure. But if I have the trust of the leaders, I can represent them a little bit more, a little bit better.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes
part of the job, for sure,
I was
right?
say,
Just to be able to represent what's happening with the folks. That's why you're the chief of the staff, right? Because you do get to, that's your seat at the table, to make sure that their voice and what's going on for them is heard, right? And what I also appreciated too is when the leaders, and I think we're all leaders, right? You're at the table because you two are a leader, so it does feel a little awkward to say them and chief of staff, us. But part of that is like, what can you just handle? Like, I am the chief of staff, like I take care of the staff stuff. You need a chair? I got you. Chair.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And, there's budget implications and things, but, one of the things that I worked out with my executive is like, what is in my span of control? What is in my scope that I can just handle? And they trust me to do that versus what needs to be brought to them, either have a conversation or one-on-one or whatever. So
I also think it's connecting the dots, though, because we can say a chair is not a big deal, but as I said, the woman was, she was calling out sick, and now it's connected to productivity, and now all of a sudden, a chair, a light, which we think of as not a big deal, has now affected our numbers for the quarter.
Right.
So right. I think one of the key things is to make sure that we understand that this stuff is all connected. There are things that are on fire that we've got to worry and we've got to put out, but this is not a fire yet. It's just a little smoldering ember. You don't want it to become a fire. And I feel like even when I was doing chief of staff work, that's honestly where I spent most of my time, because the managers were going to have to be putting out the fires that existed. It was like, okay, sort of what we talked about with that project management thing. Who's doing this and who's doing this and where are these things colliding so that we can prevent the next fire from happening. And I think even that is helping with influence, right? Because now you can bring these two leaders together and say, hey, your paths are about to cross, and not in a way that's beneficial to anybody. And guess who then gains some points now with two leaders? Because it's like, oh, this person really is kind of looking out and being a little out further than where I can be, because today I had 17 things that I had to do that I just couldn't look out that far. And I couldn't care, which I don't think is a good thing, but I can't care about what's happening in that camp over there. I have too many things to worry about in my own camp. So you kind of bridge all of that, and I think support the leaders in that way.
Such an awesome generalist role too.
Because
it was the most fun job I think I've ever had, except for clearly this one. But yeah, I loved the job. I lasted 4.5 years, which I don't think is usual. I think it's usually like a 2 to 3 year kind of gig. But I loved it. It was
You're like,
super
what's
fun. And I knew-
next?
oh wait, right? But that was it. Well, that's a different podcast. But in those 4 years, I mean, the diversity that I got from that job,
Right.
I learned more in that time than I probably did in 10 years prior to my career. And it wasn't because I knew the content. Like, the content just comes when you're around stuff. But I was never expected to be an expert in the content, which was, I think, very helpful to do exactly what you're talking about, be able to connect the dots. This sounds funny over here, and kind of use that, I don't want to say intuition because that sounds a little too fluffy, but I guess where I want to go is that emotional intelligence to go, this doesn't pass the sniff test, and I'm able to, I have the relationship to bring it up. I have the trust of people to say, like, hey, this and that, and they go, oh, yeah, actually, that's a thing. Or no, not that one, but at least you've planted the seed, at least people are thinking about stuff.
No, it's a wonderful, like, rotational program. It's one job that's a rotational program. It's like, you want to get into this, you can get into this. Like, people will the other leaders will be like, yeah, sure, go for it. We need a go-to-market strategy. You want to do that? Okay. There's plenty of work to go around, right? So that's not, and you have that purview, so you can select. It's made me think, like, what is it, as opposed to just having things given to me to do, what is it that I want to do? Yeah. And what is it that I can bring forth? So the options are there. There's no questions about that. The one thing I do miss is I miss being an expert in something in particular. Like that's the one thing,
Yeah, I think there are two types of people who take that job. All right, and this is very, very general, and we all get what we need out of it, but there's a type like me who likes to be the generalist, the connector, the seeing stuff. Like, I don't want to know too much about any of it except for the people part. Like, that I want to know about, that I don't know. And then there's people like you, Tim, who take the job for a couple of years to, like, learn more about a particular thing to then decide, that's the thing I want to go double down on. That's the thing I want to be an expert on. There's two different, like, approaches to why people take the job. At least that's my experience.
I think that's so spot on. That is so spot on, because for me, I don't like, even in program management, like, I think we all could do program management, but it's like sometimes when, especially on highly technical jobs, where it's like, you got to dig into the, I'm like, listen, favorite. I want the
program management.
I want the big strategy. Let's talk about the big milestones, nuggets that we have to hit. Really good at breaking down how those nuggets, what are the different nuggets that we have to hit per quarter, per month, per week, right? I just want to know if we're hitting them and if we're not, and why we're not. I don't want to know how the widget works with the widget here and this widget. I'm like,
yeah. And you know where I find the best program managers are the ones that are able to discern the issues. Like, actually, what's the real problem here? What are we needing to solve for? And even in we got a delay on this timeline. Okay, what's the real problem?
What's the reason? What's the challenge? Yes.
And like get to that. But man, I can't do the details. I mean, I was a good project manager for a little bit. Unfortunately, I grew up pretty quickly to not have to do that. But
so funny.
I don't want to know anything about the 3M.
It's so funny that you said SME, because I'm like, I'm a people SME, I guess. But even in then, I'm like, I really enjoy kind of the generalist. That's so funny you said that, Rachel. I just enjoy the generalist role. I'll bring in the subject matter experts that know all the nitty gritty. I love you guys, by the way. I'm bad at being that person.
I think I'm just vacillating between the two. It's like depending on the day you catch me. The generalist part, sometimes I love it, right? And then other days I'm like, why can't someone see me as an expert?
Yeah.
But it is finding is an expert.
You can be an expert generalist.
Everybody is calling you, Tim. Everyone is calling you. Hey, do you know that? Hey, what happened here? Hey, at every level too. From where do you order the something of the something to what the heck is going on with this project? You are the expert, my friend.
I think there's some sort of reckoning that I have to do here, right? Because what you're identifying, Andy, as being an expert, I identify as like the old timey like telephone operator. You know, like everyone's calling in, and then I just plug them somewhere else. You know?
Yeah, but that's what I think is the biggest value of the job. It's what I love to do the most, even, as a program manager. It's connecting, like the triaging. I know this, I know that. I was on a call yesterday. Somebody asked me, how do you know so much about this stuff? I'm like, because I've done it a bunch. I know enough to be dangerous. I know enough to ask the right questions. But don't ask me how the details work. I just know I just know who to ask and where to go. It is that plug-in. I mean, we need an image on that, because that is it. And I think that's it. There's a huge value in that. And I think when we're the person who plays that, we don't see the value in that. It takes
that's perhaps what it is. No. It is that, like, what it's similar to like when you're writing your own resume and you're like, but I just do stuff. And you read everybody else's resume and you're like, wow, you do so much great work, and then you flip it on yourself and you're like, I don't
do anything.
I do things. Whatever I do, it's like breathing. That's what I do.
It's so funny because it's only been recently that I've even realized that, like, honestly, Rachel, like, even what we do is a skill. Because I'm like, this is not. We're not working on
natural.
We're not working on babies in utero. Like, this is not hard stuff. Like, this is like everybody can do this. And it's only been recently that I'm like, oh no, lots of people can't.
You have to have an out of body moment to look back at yourself and go, oh, that's it. And especially, if in the line of work that you two do, like, to understand what the customers see in the value. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, we struggle with
Well, it's funny because, like, the conversation we were having earlier where it was like...
engagement surveys.
You were talking about engagement surveys and do we fix an ergonomic chair, and that's really not the big issue. And so it's sort of like, it's the smolder. It's going to be a fire for you. You want to pay us to come in and get all the stuff before it explodes. The broken beehive is the problem. Yes, that's the problem. So really, I think it really is difficult because I think most companies that I've had experience with, they're just in a reactionary mode constantly. And they just think that that's the normal space. And I'm like, you don't actually have to be that. And guess what? The minute that you stop running in that circle and you start thinking actually strategically, where do we want to be in the future? How does all this stuff align to what we want to do? You start thinking about all that, and now you have less fires. And guess what you open up? Now you open up time for creativity, innovation. How do we do something different? How do we improve this stuff? You're not just trying to chase after things. The hardest message to get out, it is, and to me it just seems so obvious. Like, of course we want to exercise so that we don't get sick. We don't want to get sick and then have to figure out how to get better. Like, that's not, that's the wrong way to go about it, right? But we end up in a weird cycle. Sorry.
No, you just tapped. This is a conversation, right? So we can go on segues here and tangents from each other. But there's when you're talking about creativity and having the space, creating the space for creativity, which is interesting because that goes right against another saying that we have. It says necessity is the mother of invention, right? So it's like when people are in a tough time, they have to invent something. But I always think about that sometimes having the space actually allows for some creativity. It's not always just being in rush. Yeah, you have to be creative in rush. You have to make it happen, but you may not be doing your best work in that moment.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, right? Necessity allows us to know, like, there's a problem here and we need to do something. But to actually come up with the best way to do that, the best approach, gets stifled when we're...
And I personally, my own personal experience, I failed to see that. Generally what happens when people end up in crisis, there's a necessity, they revert back to the thing that they just know. right? Like, we're just going to do it this way. It just
Good
doesn't.
enough.
We just have to get it. I've actually heard executives say, we just need to get it done. We just need to get it. And it's like, yes, but we're going to do this, and we're going to do this for 3 months to get ourselves on the right track. But we haven't solved what got us off.
Right.
Yeah.
Off
and I
track.
would even and when it comes to business problems, depending on how big or small they are, and maybe my focus is a little too small right now, but that we don't even know what we're solving for. Like, we're not actually solving for what the issue is. We're like, oh, so-and-so needs to do this. There's a problem. It's, they have a need. Well, just because what they articulated is their need might not actually be what their issue is. So don't go just fill the gap for what they said they need without taking the time to find out what problem they're trying to solve for. I mean, I see this constantly. Yeah.
Right, and it's further complicated when it's like there's a hierarchy thing, right? When it comes down from up high, and you see that, and the questions weren't asked all along the chain.
That's
right.
Totally.
And they should know, right? Because we all assume
that
our executives and leaders and the higher ups know the stuff. And they don't. And they will most of them will fully admit they don't. All they want is for somebody to ask them a question or two. Slow them down.
I'm like, what they want is for you just to fix it. They just don't want it to be on their plate. Just go fix it. Which can also be part of the problem. But this is why we talk about a problem-solving culture. Because how do we, when an issue arises, what are the steps we're taking to effectively make sure we're solving this problem? I like to say once, but in the grand scheme that we're actually getting to the root cause of what the issues are. And by the way, there's, let's see, I've probably worked on, roughly 100 projects through my life, and 0 out of 0 times is it one thing that you can do that fixes that problem. There are generally a multitude of things that are causing that. But we get stuck because we're like, that person has the red nose, so we're going to pick on that person to say it's your department that is the failing piece of this.
To do something.
And shocker, shocker, shockaroo, next year we're in the same situation, and it's like, well, I guess it wasn't the one department, was it?
Yeah.
Or the one person, was it? Yeah. So we talk about this problem-solving culture, which really, the linchpin of it is this root cause analysis, really digging into what are all the things that are driving this outcome we don't like, and then working from there.
And that everyone has a place in that questioning, in that thinking, right?
Must.
Yeah, so it's everybody's responsibility to be able to provide input into understanding the issue and to coming up with the solutions. Now, of course, this is where we talk about psychological safety and psychological bravery, to feel like that's the environment to be able to do that, and to be brave to find your voice. But
there's a lot to unpack in that one. That's big, and I'm just thinking because
you can gloss over that and move on.
Oh, I do like that you mentioned psychological bravery, because we talk a lot about psychological safety, and with psychological safety, it's always seen as that's supposed to be a top-down thing, like you have the boss sets the precedence for psychological safety, but there is this other way, and it's not as easy this way, down to up, but having that bravery and being measured, and thinking about how you want to be brave in that way to try to advance having a more of a psychological safe environment, right? Yeah. So I like that there's a responsibility we all have wherever we are.
I think that actually is such a great sort of culmination of this idea of influence, right? Is that I had a great COO at a hospital system up north, and we were trying to do this huge integration project, and it was like everybody was waiting for somebody to do something, and he finally was like, "There's no white knights. There's no one coming in to save the day. We have to figure out how to save the day." And I think it's such a great sort of analogy around an organization is not a boss or just an employee. It is a whole ecosystem, and we all own parts of that ecosystem, right? And so whether it is making sure that we're addressing the things, raising our hands, being psychologically brave, whether it is creating the space for people to feel comfortable to raise their hands, And I would say more than anything, it is once something is highlighted, i.e. in these engagement surveys, if you're going to choose to do nothing about it, that's okay. But make sure you're communicating that and people understand the why. But more importantly, fix the stuff. Fix it. Fix the stuff. It's small stuff people need, and it's going to be a huge gain back to the organization in general.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to show everything to everyone on the team. They, in fact, don't want to see it, right? That like radical transparency, like, no.
Radical. We don't need any of that.
But it is being transparent about what sort of culture you want to shape, what you're doing for that culture, what productivity looks like, what the vision of productivity is. I mean, all of those things. Yeah, people want to know about that.
That's right. That's right. Connecting to why they're there at work. Connecting to why they're doing what they do. What role do they play? What parts do they play? Right.
And removing the barriers for them to be able to play those parts. I think that's what you're getting at, Andy. A lot of these things, like, can you just move them out of the way?
Well, I mean, if you're going to ask me what a leader is, that is it. And the problem is we get stuck in the hierarchy thought process of a leader, like almost like they're you've ascended, like you're this. But really, as a leader, your job is to make sure that the people who are doing the work can get the work done. It's getting all the stuff out of the way to support them. Everything from something as small as a chair to whatever the unknown is, right? That's the work. That's the work of the work.
But it can start with a chair.
Start with the chair.
It just starts with the chair.
Because it builds trust. It builds trust. That's the relationship. You've done something for me. That's the relationship.
I mean, really, when you think about it, if you have a new manager and your new manager is like, this is what we do in our department, this is what you're going to be expecting, and then someone says, "Is your chair good for you?" I mean, that's like, that's important. That's like, okay, that's another level.
Yeah. Do you have? One of the things that, especially with leaders who weren't rounding, what we go in and we say that, like, just open with, do you have everything you need to be successful today? Don't ask, are you okay? These binary type questions. I guess that is a binary question, but it is this idea that you're going in to say, I care about what you have to do today. Tell me if there's something that's in the way, because I'm going to be here to help you knock that thing down. I care. And you wouldn't believe just the amount of like shoulders that drop, like, just this like, oh, okay. Yeah, like I got this leader.
You are actually here for me.
You're here for me. And imagine you're doing that 2 days in a row, and then you're doing that on a month. You're going in, and it's happening on a day-to-day basis over a month, over a quarter.
And then one day I actually do have something for you to do, and you do it.
And by the way, I say to leaders who say, well, we don't have time to do this and we don't have time to do that. And I'm like, you don't have time because your time is being consumed by all the stuff that you don't know because you haven't talked to your team. The minute you start talking to your team, you're not going to get a Pandora's box. People aren't going to verbally diarrhea you because they know that they have a chance to talk to you once a week, once a day. That's right. You're not going to get your email, the congestion in your email from your team is going to go way, way down because it's like, oh, I'm going to see her in the morning or I'm going to see her this evening. And so I'll just wait to ask her the question when she comes through. You're going to free up so much of your time.
Be it rounding being rounding or the listening tour we did. I think if I were to look at it, we probably saved time, increased productivity, save time because people would randomly hit you up with these things. Now they know that it's there. It's been brought out to the surface. We are doing something about it. They're not spinning their wheels. Each of the employees, each of the managers aren't trying to recreate something to address this. We're handling this all together and with sort of like to scale, right? That's right. And that saves us time and resources and the time that people are just, keeping things held in. The complaints are keeping held in, right? And not knowing
the amount
whether
that's clouding how they're thinking and clouding
Right.
what they're able to focus on.
Or
I'm
what
like, I
they're-
need you to focus on the work, not on your chair. Like,
Or what they're teamsing each other instead of
Yeah,
working,
right.
or what
Right,
they're...
right.
That
around
hornet's
the
nest you were
chat.
talking about, right? And it's like it's this like imaginary hornet's nest that gets bigger and bigger the more we just keep it under the surface, right?
That's right.
Oh, so much. We could go on forever here, right? And influencing certainly is key, not just to the chief of staff role, but to all of our work. That is what we have to do, whether it's up, down, sideways, etc. So we actually spend a whole week in Find Your Leadership Voice just talking about this.
Just talking about this. Very thing.
Probably 2 weeks, and it comes up all the time. But Tim, thank you so much for joining us and chatting with us. Hope you come back and share some more pearls of wisdom there.
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for making me think about what I do and realizing that it is actually something, like it is an expertise
you are an
of sorts.
expert. Yes.
So I appreciate it. These conversations are always good. Hope they're good for other people too, but it was good for me.
Love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Until
so
next
much.
time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.